Hey, this is Richard Chancey with the John Maxwell Leadership Podcast. As always, today I've got my partner in crime, the CEO of all of John Maxwell's companies, Mark Cole. And what we're going to do today is the same thing we've done in the last couple episodes, which is to talk about this painful subject called blind spots. So we're going to join John for just a few minutes, and we're going to start talking about what the most common blind spots are that we wrestle with, and then Mark and I are going to chew on that a little bit afterwards to help you give some practical application for your business.
When Larry Stevens emailed me this wonderful kind of thought-provoking subject, I did spend a couple of weeks just thinking about leaders that I know that have been tripped up or messed up or have in some context not done well, and all of a sudden everybody kind of did this turnaround and kind of this, what happened to them? What did they do? And I began to ask myself, is there a commonality of blind spots? They're individual, but can we just say that for leaders there are certain areas that a lot of leaders have blind spots in? And I tried to identify some of them, and I'm going to give them to you now. Interestingly enough, the first one I give you, I think, almost always is the main one, but I've never heard anybody talk about it before. So let's talk about it. A singular perspective. Larry and this really isn't a Larry Stevens quote, but in his email he put it there, and I wanted to, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail. I think the greatest blind spot a leader has, let me just put this in reverse for a second before I teach this. The greatest asset that a leader has is the ability to see other people's points of views and understand consensus. That's the greatest ally and asset a leader ever has. To be able to not only know what they're thinking and what they sense, but to be able to know what the people are thinking and what they sense. A focus that expands beyond this is what I think and this is what I feel as a leader, but really is inclusive, is a great asset to a leader. Because it allows that leader to understand how to lead and motivate others, because you lead and motivate others not from your perspective, but from their perspective. You motivate and lead others not from how you feel about something, but by how other people feel about something. And so the ability to have a wide perspective is the greatest asset a leader has. Well, the blind spot is when a person has a leadership position and they have a singular perspective. The next paragraph, I'm going to read it. It's in your notes. I'm sure that many of you know the legend of the 6 blind men who were led to an elephant so they could examine it. The first man touched the side of the elephant and said, "It's very much like a wall." The second man touched the elephant's tusk and said, "It's very much like a spear." The third man took the elephant's squirming trunk in his hand and commented, "It's very much like a snake." The fourth man, embracing one of the legs, remarked, "It's very much like a tree." The fifth man, feeling the elephant's ear, shouted, "Even a blind man can tell that this animal is very much like a fan." The sixth man grabbed the hold of the tail and said, "This elephant is really very much like a rope." Then the 6 men went home, each one satisfied that he understood what an elephant looked like. Just tells it all right there, doesn't it? The fact that 6 people can be in the same environment and come away with 6 different conclusions. Again, in Winning with People, the big picture principle says the entire population of the world, with one minor exception, is composed of others. And what I've discovered is a blind spot for leaders is when they have a singular perspective and they read every situation and every person from how they see from their perspective. It's like King George III of England, who wrote in his journal on, get the date here, July 4th, 1776. Here are the words he wrote in his journal. "Nothing happened today." Nothing happened today. Well, in his world, in his singular perspective, nothing happened today. Now, I think I'm talking about this because this was the first blind spot that I discovered in myself, that I didn't discover in myself. I had people help me discover. In fact, my wife, Margaret, helped me with this one, major. For probably the first 5-6 years of my leadership, I was so focused on how I felt about things and what I believed about things that I really was not a consensus leader. I just absolutely said, this is right, this is it, this is my conviction, this is what I believe, this is where I'm going, this is the goal, go to the mountain. And I had a very, very singular perspective in my life, and it was becoming a blind spot. In fact, my motto was, save time, see it my way. Yeah. Yeah. You know, an impatient person, which is another huge weakness in my life, I'm very, very impatient. You get around these rooms where everybody wants to have their thoughts and their ideas, and you're saying, dear God, how long do we have to listen to this before we could move on, you know? And, you know, you let everybody share, let everybody, you know, kumbaya, here we go. And then I just sit there and I think, boy, I can just hardly wait till we get done with all this stuff so we can go do it my way. Now, I'm just confessing all my sins and guilt to you because these are issues that I had to deal with in my own life. And my wife saw this she just said, John, you're too singular in your focus. And a life change for me was when she brought to me, we went on vacation together, and she read to me Florence Littauer's book, Personality Plus. It's a classic old book. It's still in print, but it's a classic old book of the four temperaments. And for the first time in my life, I began to see other people who had temperaments different than me and how they saw their world, and it was very, very eye-opening to me. In fact, I put it in your notes just because if you want to, it just helped me. It's an old classic book. But in your notes while you're there, here's what I want you to see the difference. Followers are inward focused. Basically, the follower's question is always, how will this affect me? Where leaders, and I should have put in front of it good leaders, because just because you have a leadership position or a leader doesn't mean you're a good one. Leaders are outward focused. And they have to be asking the question all the time, how will this affect others? It's like Art Martell said in his book, How to Master the Inner Game of Selling. He said, I love playing chess. Whenever I'm losing at chess, I consistently get up and stand behind my opponent and see the board from his side. Then I start to discover the stupid moves I've made because I can see it from his viewpoint. The salesman's challenge is to see the world from the prospect's viewpoint. Well, that's not a challenge for a salesman. That's a challenge for leaders, to see things from other people's perspective. A great perspective, you know, kind of like the opposite of the elephant. This is kind of funny. This is not in your notes. One more thing, and then I'm ready to get off of a singular perspective. I'm going to spend more time on that one than the others because I really believe that is the leader's number one blind spot, the inability to see and think and feel what other people see, think, and feel, and convey that and communicate that to them. So let me just read this to you. After World War II, a general and his young lieutenant were on a train in England, and when they got on, the only seats left were across from a beautiful young lady and her grandmother. So they sat facing them. As the train pulled out, it went through a long tunnel. For about 10 seconds, there was total darkness. In the silence of the moment, those on the train heard two things, a kiss and a slap. And everyone on the train had their own perception as to what had happened. The young lady thought to herself, I'm flattered that the lieutenant kissed me, but I'm terribly embarrassed that grandmother hit him. The grandmother thought, I'm aggravated that he kissed my granddaughter, but I'm proud that she had courage to retaliate. The general was sitting there thinking to himself, my lieutenant showed a lot of guts kissing that girl, but why did she slap me by mistake? The lieutenant is the only one on the train who really knew what happened. For you see, in that brief moment of darkness, he had the opportunity to both kiss a pretty girl and slap his general at the same time. Okay. Blind spots. I think the number one blind spot that leaders have in commonality is a singular perspective. Now, let me give you the other ones. Number two is insecurity. Major blind spot, I think, among leaders. In your notes, memo from a company president to personnel manager. Search the organization for an alert, aggressive young man who could step into my shoes, and when you find him, fire him. There's an insecure leader. You know what I'm talking about? They can't handle anybody around them that's ever going to be successful. Let's go on. Insecure leaders are a detriment to themselves and to their organization at which they lead. They place their followers in jeopardy. They place their organization in jeopardy. They even place themselves in jeopardy. Insecurity causes the leader to think only of himself. Boy, this is a very key phrase, and the very essence of leadership is others. And therein is the blind spot. You have never met an insecure person who was other-focused. Insecure people are absolutely, how's it going to affect me? How do people think about me? How do they perceive me? How did I do? They are constantly doing inward checks, which is the antithesis of what leadership is all about. So insecure people have major blind spots because they can never get away from themselves long enough to see others, and so therefore they're very, very vulnerable. So how do you spot an insecure leader? Let me just give you some basic things here quickly. Number one, an insecure leader has a hard time giving credit to others. That's just very true. Why? Well, insecure people need the credit. Therefore, it becomes bothersome to share it. Remember, insecure people are needy people. Carnegie said, "No man will be a great leader who wants to do it all himself or get all the credit for doing it." Number two, an insecure leader keeps information from his staff or her staff. You see, communication is a form of empowerment, and when you release information, you convey trust and confidence in others, and when you conceal information, you convey the opposite: no trust, no confidence. Number three, an insecure leader does not want his staff exposed to other leaders. They may see qualities in others that they like and that you don't possess, so they keep you away. Number four, an insecure leader is threatened by the growth of others. They're like crabs in a basket. When you go hunt for crabs and you pick one up and put it in the basket, as soon as you pick the next crab in the basket, the one characteristic of crabs is if one crab starts to climb out of the basket, the other crab will reach up and pull it down. I mean, it's just the nature of crabs. Crabs won't let crabs crawl out. It's a great picture of insecurity right there. Insecure people will never let other people ever excel, exceed. They'll pull them down every time. Number five, an insecure leader is often a micromanager. They're control freaks. They have to have tight reins on everyone and everything so that they can ultimately take credit for everything. Now, here's the danger zone. There is a danger zone in which insecure leaders eventually place themselves in their organization. Here are some symptoms of the danger zone that insecure leaders create. Number one, danger. Insecure leaders are really not leaders. Why? Boy, this is so important. You cannot lead people that you need. If you need people, you'll not ever lead them effectively because your need for them will be so great that you'll never make the right decisions. You'll make palatable decisions. You'll make decisions that they like, but you can never lead them. You can especially never lead them in uncharted territory because you've got to have approval. You have an approval addiction. Secure leaders love people, but they do not need people. And I want to be very careful when I say they don't need people. It's not that they have a distaste for it. They love people. They get the picture. They love people, but they don't have to have the affirmation of people before they can make those tough decisions. They can look you right in the eye and say, "I want you to know I love you very much," and no, we're not going to do that. Here's the direction we're going to go. A second danger is that insecure leaders don't provide security for those they lead. That's just a fact. You've never seen a secure staff with an insecure leader. You just haven't. Their anxiety, apprehension, that's just part of the DNA of a staff that is led by insecure leaders. And the reason why all this is you cannot give what you do not possess. You just can't. So if you're insecure yourself, you can't pass out and pass on security. Secure leaders empower and appreciate others. They just do. And to become an effective leader, you must make your followers feel good about themselves and what they're doing. Third danger, insecure leaders take more from people than they give. It's just a fact. Insecure people are on a personal quest for validation and affirmation. Instead of giving validation and affirmation to their followers, they need to receive it from them. Secure leaders contribute to the benefit of others. Secure leaders do all they can to help others win. That's just the way it is. Number 4 danger. Insecure leaders limit the best people. Insecure leaders cannot genuinely celebrate victories won by others. Why? They're jealous of them. And who gets most of the victories? The best people. So therefore, they're constantly limiting the best people. Secure leaders release the best people and allow them to go for it. Secure leaders thrive on seeing others succeed and love to see them reach their God-given potential. Number 5, the 5th danger, insecure leaders limit their organization. Because if you limit your best people, then you have no recourse then to limit your organization, whereas secure leaders allow their organization to soar. One last quote, then we'll review the first 2 thoughts. Nothing is a greater impediment to being on good terms with others than being ill at ease with yourself. How true, how true. 2 basic blind spots we've talked about with leaders. 1, a singular perspective. Number 2, insecurity. Number 3, as I look at leaders and, again, try to generalize or put in a common pool things that I think leaders have blind spots in, I think number 3 is, without any question in my mind, would fit in the category. That's devaluing people. Leaders who devalue other people will constantly have blind spots. Again, in Winning with People, the people principle number 2, it was called the number 10 principle. Believing the best in people usually brings out the best in people. And I've got a quote by Bill Marriott you can read on your own. Let me give you these thoughts on leaders here. Leaders who value their people give them their best effort. Leaders who devalue their people give them their least effort. Can I tell you that is an absolute fact? When you and I as leaders devalue people, I have never known a leader who devalues people who gave them his or her best. It is not in the DNA. In fact, here's what I have always said. A leader will give his or her effort based upon his or her evaluation of the people they lead. So if I evaluate you, if I'm your leader and I evaluate you as a 3, guess what I'll give you? I'll give you about a 3 effort. If I evaluate you as a 9, I'll give you a 9 effort. In other words, how I evaluate you will determine my effort I give to you. That is a fact. And when you devalue people, the blind spot becomes huge in your life because the effort you give is going to be corresponding to how you see them. Leaders, back to your notes, who value their people serve their people, or leaders who devalue their people want to be served by their people. Leaders who value their people empower them. Leaders who devalue their people control them. Leaders who value their people motivate them. Leaders who devalue their people manipulate them. I have an article that Michael Zigarelli sent me. He's at Regent University. I loved the title of it. It was How to Lose Friends and Infuriate People. Isn't that great? Just kind of obviously the opposite, how to win friends and influence people, how to lose friends and infuriate people. And here's what Michael said. Want to be really an ineffective leader? Want to exasperate and exhaust your employees? Then look no farther, my friend. Here are 15 worst practices in leadership, guaranteed to pummel productivity, murder morale, and trigger turnover. And here's a freebie. Be sure to post them on your office door as new policies for all of your employees to read. And I'm just going to take it really quick. It's just in there for you to have. When employees in your office to talk with you, don't hesitate to answer your phone. Take a week to respond to requests and queries from your employees. Hey, take 2. Criticize people in public. Don't worry whether the criticism is blatant or tact. It'll have the same effect. Permit inequities and conflict to persist among your employees. Remember that you're way too important to deal with their petty tiffs. Be stingy with your thank yous. After all, it'll just make people think you should be paying them more money. Pay people less than they're worth. Give raises based on factors they can't influence, or better still, based on their performance relative to one another. Don't smile when you say hello to employees. Better yet, don't even say hello. Third option, if you must say hello, follow that up as how you doing, and then look away before the answer. Ask people to do well outside of their job description. Interpret all suggestions for improvement as personal attacks on your leadership. Do your subordinates' jobs for them. If that's not attractive to you, though, dump all your work on them instead. Give people the illusion of empowerment. Tell them they have the control over a process and hold them accountable for results, but then micromanage the process to meet your predetermined ends. Take credit for good work your people do and blame your department's problems on their laziness and ineptitude. Hold lots of meetings and make sure that they have an unfocused agenda. Allow the conversation to meander aimlessly, permitting one tyrannical comment to give license to the next. Never cut off a rambling participant, and if anyone has a good idea, let that person assume responsibility for a new committee to pursue the idea in the meeting with no action items. When scheduled to meet with an employee or with a group of employees, be late, sometimes very late. The meeting can't start without you, right? Never forget that you're superior to your employees, and never doubt that you're absolutely right. In doing so, you'll be guaranteed to skillfully apply all the above secrets of success. Now, here's what I thought was so interesting about Michael's 15 worst practices on how to lose and infuriate people. Here's what I thought was very interesting. Of those 15, 12 of them are a direct result of devaluing people. 12 of them have devalue people written right across them. It's a blind spot.
Hey, this is Richard Chancey again, and I'm here with my partner, Mark Cole, on the podcast. Thanks for being here, Mark.
Absolutely. Glad to be here, man.
Hey, when I listen to what we listened to today, one prevailing thought comes to mind. John Maxwell thinks everything is my fault. When I listen to John's stuff, I'm always thinking, the tendency for me, and this is a struggle that I have as a leader, is to, I think it's human nature, is to push responsibility out to other people, like to not take responsibility. And I think as leaders, that's one of the things that we have to fight for. And that was really being pinged, that sense that, hey, as the leader, if you want to affect a different organization, if you want to affect different culture in your organization, get more done, then as a leader, you've got to take responsibility for the things that are not going well in your organization.
Yeah, you know what he said that really struck me to that point, Richard? He says, leaders must have a singular position. They must understand responsibilities on my shoulders. The buck stops here, baby. It is on you. But they must have a collective perspective. And a lot of times, leaders have a singular perspective. It's my opinion, and they have a collective position. It's our responsibility. But that's not what John is saying. I love that concept. That's to your point. We must have a singular position and a collective perspective.
Yeah, and so as we kind of go through, and what we're going to talk about today is just these three big things, these three biggest challenges that a leader faces with blind spot. The first one being that singular perspective. Now, I think you can kind of tackle this thing in one of two ways to try to get better perspective on the team and your blind spots. You can go to it in, you can use humility and go and really try to find something out and learn something, or you can go into this with this manipulative spirit, which is I'm going to understand the perspective so that I can leverage that perspective to get people to do what I want. So why don't you dive in a little bit, Mark, and talk about how do we go out, gain more perspective, and then help people understand the vision and where we're going?
Yeah, last week, Richard, you challenged everybody to ask the question, what am I missing? And going back to that, and if you really ask that question, and hopefully some of you this week, you really tried that. You went and asked somebody, what am I missing? But when you go and you really ask that question and you're authentically wondering what you're missing, you can't have a singular perspective. And John says the main blind spot is a singular perspective. But when you discipline yourself to truly not just ask, which that's a discipline for some of us, but to truly care for the answer, which is a second discipline for us, you eradicate the blind spot of a singular perspective. I mentioned last week, I mentioned about the conversation that Stephanie, my wife, and I are having about Tori, or about our youngest daughter, Macy. And I realized in that moment that I was having a singular perspective. And it's when we have tackled this issue collectively. I made the decision. I made the decision before I called her back. I said, you know what? If we can't agree to do this activity, then we don't do the activity. Now, the old Mark would have said, we're going to do this activity. It's my job to convince. But having a more collective understanding that I've got a blind spot here made me realize I don't want to move forward unless we have consensus. I love John's perspective on this. In fact, recently John had the opportunity to make the biggest leadership decision of his life. Guys, trust me on this. It was the biggest opportunity that John had ever been presented with relating to his leadership. We wrestled with it. We spent an entire 10 days. I've never spent 10 days with John Maxwell on anything. When he talks about his impatience, he's right. It's still there. We've never tackled something for 10 days. We spent 10 days working through this decision. We brought people in. We sought counsel. At the end of the day, John made a decision not to do it. Why? Because it was a great decision and opportunity for him, but it would have been very polarizing for the thousands of coaches and men and women that are on John Maxwell's team. The singular perspective of the greatest leadership opportunity I've ever had was no longer effective when we realized the impact that it could have on others. And I watched him deny the greatest leadership opportunity of his life, because if he would have stepped forward into that opportunity, it would have polarized people rather than unify people. And that's what we as leaders have to do. We have to look at a decision on how it is best for others rather than how it impacts us. John says good leaders are outward focused, followers are inward focused. I watched John Maxwell in this moment. Greatest opportunity, greatest testament of his leadership. I watched him get outward focused to finalize the decision rather than go inward focus. Now, on a secondary note, I love what John says. Hey, gang, we can just save time here. Just see it my way. But that's the antithesis. That's a blind spot statement. And while I love it, that lets me know that I kind of like that blind spot, Richard.
Yeah, that's big, and you're tap dancing all over something right there, Mark, that I think is, we go all the way down to the family level, and we talk about how these principles impact us at home. We talk about how they impact us here, but then we got this thing that's going on in our country right now, and polarizing is the word that I took from what you just said there. Singularity of perspective is polarizing, and if you have made a comment on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram the last few days railing on somebody, chances are that you have a singular perspective. Talk about that. What's our leadership facing as a culture? What are we facing, and how do we leverage the idea of multiple perspectives to get over this season that we're in?
I'm going to give you two examples of what we do in John Maxwell's companies. The first is this podcast. Richard, you know this. Before we even cut on the tape today, before we even cut on the recorder, before we ever did that, we looked at our team sitting in this room and said, okay, gang, what's your opinion of what we need to address after listening to John's content? What do we need to hit? I didn't want to get on this microphone if I didn't have a perspective of somebody other than even me and you. I love that we're co-hosting this. This is going to be fun. Gang, you're in for a ride. Me and Richard are playing nice right now, but leadership's not always nice. But I'll tell you, it's not just mine and your perspective, Richard. Just like in the story I just gave you with John. It is about multiple people's perspective makes us better. So in this podcast episode 4, before we cut on the recording, I wanted to know what our team in studio here thought about the content. I'll tell you what's going to happen right after we push the pause button and we stop today. We're going to look at our entire team and say, okay, gang, what was good? What could have been better? How do we improve next time? It's a practice in our organization to hear other people's perspective. We don't always get it right. I don't want to sound too good here, but we absolutely create that as a diligence. Just yesterday, or just 2 days ago rather, right before the recording here, I called all of our team together to something I, as the CEO of this organization, does on a consistent basis. Every quarter, I bring them in a town hall meeting setting. And I come with a question and make sure that I don't express my opinion or my position. You mentioned it. We've got critical things facing the entire globe right now. Politically, spiritually, socially, We are polarized around the world. I travel 20, 30 countries a year. It is a polarizing time. Yesterday, this week, I brought 3 things that are globally polarizing right now to our team. And I said, gang, here is the issue. What is your perspective on the issue? We had entry-level people there. We had customer service representatives there. We had presidents of our division there. We had people that had been pastors before. We had people that still trying to figure this whole God thing out. They were all in there giving a perspective on an issue. And Richard, you were there. It was brilliant because we were ensuring, as the leadership brand of the world, the premier leadership brand, that we don't become so isolated, even in just John Maxwell's opinion, or Mark Cole's opinion, or Richard Chancey's opinion. I wanted to hear every angle as we tackle this issue as a leadership organization.
Now, if you're dialed in to what we're talking about right here, you might be thinking to yourself, I don't know if I could ever have a meeting like that with my team. This is what I would ask you to ponder. Just take a second and ask yourself why that is. Are you concerned about the political environment? Are you concerned about the ramifications of having a very robust conversation around some challenging subjects and what that might mean for you legally? Or are you scared that as a leader you're going to hear something, a truth revealed about yourself? Either way, I think you got to wrestle with those things, because let me tell you this, not having the conversation is no longer an option. We can't let sleeping dogs lie when it comes to big ideas like the Me Too movement, big ideas like the national anthem and the kneeling thing, because what's happening is the lack of conversation is creating that polarization. The second thing is you might hear something that you don't want to hear as a leader that might reflect on you, and your identity's wrapped up in your title. So that leads us right into the second thing that John talked about, Mark, which is insecurity as a leader is a blind spot. If you didn't listen very closely, I think it'd be worth your time going back through with the notes just how John describes insecurity, because, in full transparency, we all have insecurities, right? We tend to line our identity up with that title on our business card, and then everything either pings whether we're good or at that or not. Same thing happens at home for me as a husband or a father, and if we're not careful, we lean into that, what John talked about, needing people versus leading people.
You can't lead people that you need. You know what I love about this question or this point, this blind spot? I get asked all the time, what's the one thing you admire about John the most? John says that success is when those that know you the most think the most of you. And I love that definition of success. In other words, the people that are closest to you, the people that have the greatest proximity, should have the highest opinion of you. Whew, that's kind of convicting as I think about that. Don't call my wife today. How about that? Let's just go there. But really, truly, the thing that I get asked a lot, what do you admire the most about John? And you know what it is, Richard? It's that he's comfortable in his own skin. He's comfortable in his own skin. He never takes himself too seriously. He never takes himself too small. John says this, I love this statement. He says, if you would have heard me a long time ago when I first started, I wasn't as bad as you thought. I promise you, I was a little bit better. He said, but if you look at me right now on top of the world at 71, I'm not that good. Somewhere in the middle of people's worst perspective of you and their best perspective of you, you find you. And I think understanding that's important to this component, this blind spot of insecurity. Being comfortable in your own skin. I'm in a process right now, perhaps some of you have met me at some event where John was brought in to speak, paid big dollars to speak. And then he brings this little redheaded, Southern-talking CEO up to take 15 or 20 minutes to share some application. And when John first started that with me, I went, John, come on. People are paying to hear you. They want to hear you. They do not need to hear me. And John said, yes, they do. But more importantly, me and you need to hear you to make sure you're really representing me well. Now, he wasn't getting me up there to get an invitation back. He wasn't getting me up there to get greater accolades. He could have kept the microphone and done that. He did that because he understands you can't empower people until you value them. And I know we're going to number 3 of what he says, devaluing people. But stay right here with insecurity. You can never eliminate the third blind spot that John talks about until you get settled in the second blind spot we're talking about right here, insecurity. Because I don't want you to be seen as the best leader in John's organization, Richard, if I'm not satisfied in what I'm bringing to the table? I need to keep you one notch below me so I continue to look good. And an insecure leader is impossible to flourish under. You can't do it. You can climb, but when you hit that lid of their security or lack thereof, you cannot grow beyond that. And as a leader, just today, I'm convicted. How well am I securing an environment where you, as a president of our consumer division, how can I create an environment to where you can flourish? I can't do it with insecurity. I can only do it if I get comfortable in my own skin.
Yeah, that's big, Mark. And if you're, again, we're talking about blind spots, right? So if you're insecure, there's a really good chance that you don't know it. So let me ask you a couple questions. Let me ask us a couple of questions. When was the last time I gave credit to somebody? Do I need the people on my team to hold me up as their leader? Am I keeping information from my staff, from the people on my team? Do I keep them from being exposed to other leaders? Am I threatened by their growth and by the fact that they may be better at something than I am? Am I taking things back that I gave them ownership of so that I can do them? And then the last thing is, do I need to feel like I know what they're doing every minute of every day? You know, and I think those are, going back to what a blind spot is, you can't see the blind spot, but you can see the ripple effect of the blind spot. And I think those are good questions to start asking yourself as we move through this and go, hey, because let me just tell you, Mark and I are going to come off on this podcast like we are supremely secure. We should probably just let the recording run a little bit longer as we get into each other when this is over. But the bottom line is we all have insecurities. We all fall short from time to time.
But on that point, Richard, sorry to interrupt you, but on that point.
That makes me very insecure when you interrupt.
When I interrupt you, yeah, there you go. When on that point, I love the greatest gap, in my opinion, between an audience and a speaker is the 4 to 5 feet between the first row and the stage where the speaker is standing. That gap makes me think that speaker that's speaking has it all together, and I will never achieve being a John Maxwell. And the truth is, you won't. I won't ever achieve to be a John Maxwell, but I'll be the best me. And if I look at them as a guide, somebody that can inspire me to be the best me, rather than an example of what I need to shoot for, I can minimize that gap. And I want to say this right here because it's all about insecurity right here. You don't need to look at Mark or Richard, and not even John Maxwell, whom I love. I've given a lot of my life to see him impacting. You don't need to see that as a benchmark. You need to see that as a launching pad for you to be the best you can be. Don't set us up. Don't even set John Maxwell up, because the reason he can be so comfortable in his own skin is because he's not trying to impress anybody. He's just trying to empower people to reach their full potential.
Yeah, that's big, and I think the list that I just read off of, and how do you become a more secure leader? You give credit. You stop needing people. You stop yourself from needing their approval. You keep information in front of your staff. You expose them to better leaders. This is the same list inverted. The interesting thing, Mark, about insecurity as it relates to the number 3 a blind spot of devaluing people. If I need people to value me and they don't, then I devalue them. So if you think about that cyclical nature, if our security is wrapped up in what our team thinks of us, then obviously we're only going to value the people that value us, which winds up with a lot of people that just think like I do, and they say what I want to hear.
Let me say that. Let me make sure I get that again. If I devalue people, if I devalue people that I'm trying to value, I'll never be able to influence them or value them. Say that first statement again.
So again, hey, listener, this is Mark and I wrestling with an idea I was hoping we would get here. Yeah. So as a leader, if I'm insecure and I need you to feel like I'm a great leader and you don't, then I'm going to devalue you.
Brilliant.
Your value in my mind has to do with my security in what you think about me. It's this, I don't know, Emerson Eggerichs has a book called there's a thing inside of his book, I'll think of it in a second, called The Crazy Cycle in Marriage. Without love, she reacts without respect, and vice versa. It's the same thing, a dynamic, I think. where if somebody doesn't feel like I'm a good leader, then I'm not going to think they're a very valuable team member. And it's a crazy cycle that continues to perpetuate itself, because I think I can think through teams that I lead both here and in my other organization and think, do I value some people on those teams more than others just because of the relationship? And I think the answer is, unfortunately, I do, just because of the nature of the relationship, and that some people hold me to they hold me out higher than I probably need to be.
You know, it's going to this. I'm going to use an illustration. I'm going to use you as the illustration, Richard. Now, what I know is this may never reach our listeners because they have the editing and erase button after I've walked out of the studio. But let me say this. This is what I love about you and what you just shared. You came into this organization leading a highly functioning, highly successful team. But you had a vision of an even greater success and an even greater producing team than what they already were. And you listened for a few days as you disciplined yourself to do that because you had so much vision, so much energy. And when you begin to roll out vision, this is your own admission to the team that I got to hear. When you begin rolling out vision, you begin rolling out vision as if everything the team had not been doing before was not very good and we're going to disrupt it. And when you realize that and realize that that was being taken as a devaluing of the team, I watched you stand in front of your team, a new leader, still full of vision, still full of excitement, realize that your vision casting off of what we could do better from yesterday was actually devaluing the team, and you changed that model. That's what we're talking about. You look at the third blind spot that John had. You had no idea you were devaluing the team. You had no idea they were taking your new ideas and critique of past ideas as devaluing. But when you realized it was a devaluing environment that you were creating, that was a blind spot revelation of you in my office right before we went and met the team. You came out and changed your ways and publicly said, I'm not intending on devaluing the team. You see, it's a blind spot. Just one more quick thing, and then wrap this thing up, or however you want to go. But about 4 months ago, I asked a question in a company meeting here at John Maxwell's company, the leadership mecca of the world. And I said, hey guys, what's our vision? And it was one of those formats. It was a workshop environment. I had 6 round tables, 5, 6, 7 people around the round tables. And I said, go into your round tables, go into your rooms, go into your little sessions, and everybody describe what the vision of the John Maxwell enterprise is and be ready to report on it. Gang, you know the rest of the story on the podcast. You know. All of this, we had 6 tables. We had 5 different opinions of our vision. It freaked me out. I went, we're the example. We're the model. So I went in with John Maxwell. I said, not only do I need a clear vision, I not only need a clear purpose, but I want to understand your values, John. And I say all of that story because we'll teach on that again sometime down the road, because it was very revealing to me and my leadership. But that sparked a conversation with John and I to say, John, what do you value, and what in your values made you start companies? And what in your values made you choose me to lead companies? Talk to me about your values, because those values need to be a part of our secret sauce. We went through an arduous process to identify. We started with 26 values that John thinks are very important. We distilled it down to 7, but here's my point. Number 1, the first value in this order. Now, we obviously stated faith. We obviously stated family. But in this order, we determined that our top value was people. Now, hold on. That's important to me. It may not be important to you on the podcast, but it was important. And John came back with this statement and says, you cannot value people. You cannot add value to people. Our purpose statement, adding value to people who multiply value to others. You can't add value to people if you don't value them. That's what you just said to me. You devalue people because you want to see your value greater, and you lose credibility in serving others and improving the life of others. You cannot improve something that you don't think has value enough to prove it. And that's what we do here. That's our value. That's what we're about. And that's why this is a blind spot. If we devalue people, we'll never be able to see ourselves as a conduit of flowing value or adding value to them.
Yeah, let me respond to a couple things you said there. So let's jump into my grits for a second. Grits are Southern thing. Sorry for that.
I completely caught it.
Yeah,
I got the colloquialism.
Everybody in the studio knows what a grit is. Hey, here's the thing, talking about the interaction that I had with people. I had a Holy Spirit moment, if you will, where I thought, oh man, everything that I say has weight in this environment. What I just heard you say, I don't know that I thought this before, but devaluing an idea is devaluing people. Devaluing a person's idea is devaluing people. To go way back in my story, when I was third, fourth grade, I had a teacher, I stuttered and I couldn't read very well, and I had a teacher that would call me stupid. And so it's a wound that I have that I've carried into a lot of different places. Now, you and I have wrestled with this wound and these wounds over the years. But what if I'm not careful, that idea plays out when I come into the environment. I feel like there's a natural part of me that feels like it's got to be the smartest guy in the room. And what if I'm not careful, what happens is I just overpower people because of that woundedness, and at the same time, my strong personality. And in that environment that we're talking about coming in, I'm going, whoa, I really need to slow myself down a little bit. Same thing with you when you go in and you ask the question, what are we about? What is it that we do? And you get these different answers. I think they're different environments, but what we have at that moment is a choice as leaders. What direction do I go in this? Do I strengthen this blind spot, or do I take a step back from it and go, whoa, I need to learn something right here so that we can go in a different direction? And I think that's how insecure leaders become more secure leaders, is by embracing the tension and that the painful part of this. Nobody said this was going to be easy, Mark. Nobody said that becoming a leader. In fact, I hear John all the time saying when he writes his last leadership book, it's going to be called Leadership Sucks, because there are moments when you've got to grow, and growth happens when you experience pain.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, again, this whole blind spot piece, we as leaders have got to make a commitment to better ourselves. We said that last episode when we said, what am I missing? I think we need to say that again this week in assessing these 3 blind spots that John gave us. Are we valuing people at a place to where we can add value to them? And you cannot add value. You can't better yourself for the sake of others if you don't see that value. So, what an incredible lesson today, Richard. I'm just blown away.
Yeah, and so let's turn this a little bit and talk about some practical application, because here's what's on my mind, Mark. We absolutely want to value people. The benefit to your organization is there's gold in them dire hills. Your people, all of us is smarter than any one of us, right? There's gold inside of people. People are walking around saying, you know what we really ought to do? And whatever comes behind that, some of it you really should do. And if people don't think you value them, you're never going to hear those things. So how do we take this week, Mark, this idea about valuing people, becoming more secure as leaders? How do we take this into our organizations and start to do some of that hard work?
I would really ask you to honestly ask the people that are closest to you, and that's in the workplace as well as significant people in your life, your significant other. I would go say, guys, if I had a blind spot that I struggle with the most out of these 3, a singular perspective, insecurity, or devaluing people, which one would you say is a bigger blind spot in my life? Which one am I struggling the most with? And I would encourage you this week, go allow people around you. That's going to be the challenge a lot on these episodes of blind spots. Get other people's perspective. You don't see yourself the way others see you. Give them these 3 things, allow them to assess you, and when they hit on a nerve, ask them to speak into it, hold you accountable to getting a greater awareness of yourself in that area.
Super. Thanks so much for that, Mark. If you haven't already, subscribe to the John Maxwell Leadership Podcast. We are just getting started. You haven't missed anything yet. Go ahead and subscribe now. If you want to get the notes for this series on blind spots from John, you can get that at maxwellpodcast.com/blind spots. You can go over there and get that today. And we will catch you in the next episode. This is a 4-part episode series, so we still have quite a bit more to discuss on this idea of blind spots.